This is a homily for the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 12, verses 32 to 48. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. Father Paul Neville, a renowned headmaster of the English Benedictine College, Ampleforth, was attending the annual September meeting of the Headmasters' Conference sometime in the 1930s. One of Father Neville's independent school colleagues was addressing the assembly, telling them what he sought to achieve for the pupils attending his school. "What we try to do is to equip our boys for life." In a whisper, Father Neville was heard to murmur, "How fascinating. You see, at Ampleforth, we always seek to prepare our boys for death." That isn't quite as morbid as it might first sound. In preparing students for death, you are, in reality, giving them the best possible preparation for life. You're inviting them to discern what is truly important, authentic, and life-giving. The Cistercian monk Thomas Merton had this to say about the Desert Fathers and Mothers in the introduction to his book, The Wisdom of the Desert. What they sought most of all was their own true self in Christ. And in order to do this, they had to reject completely the false, formal self fashioned under social compulsion in the world. A life of solitude and labour, poverty and fasting, charity and prayer, which enabled the old, superficial self to be purged away and permitted the gradual emergence of the true secret self in which the believer and Christ were one spirit. The proximate end of all this striving was purity of heart, a clear, unobstructed vision of the true state of affairs, an intuitive grasp of one's own inner reality as anchored, or rather lost, in God through Christ. This is, of course, what Jesus is talking about in today's Gospel. We are accompanying Jesus and his disciples as they slowly make their way to Jerusalem for the celebration of Passover. As I suggested last week, this is more than just a geographical journey from Galilee in the north to Jerusalem in the south. It is also about an inner journey. Jesus is teaching his followers about discipleship, about life in the kingdom of God. In last Sunday's Gospel, Jesus warned his disciples against avarice, for life does not consist in abundance of possessions. Once again, the word translated here as avarice is pleonexia in the Greek. It describes the greedy desire to have more money, more power, more pleasure, regardless of the moral cost. It is therefore ultimately a form of idolatry. Today's Gospel continues the same theme. Get yourselves purses that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, that is where your heart will be too. The spiritual journey is about discovering where the heart is, or to use Merton's term, the true self in Christ. Evelyn Underhill's 1911 classic, Mysticism, A Study in Nature and Development of Spiritual Consciousness, identified 3 stages on what she called the mystic way, but we could also call it the way of discipleship. The 3 stages are, firstly, the awakening of the self, secondly, the purification of the self, and thirdly, the illumination of the self. Let's consider the first step, the awakening of the self. Underhill identifies this stage with a long period of restlessness, uncertainty, and mental stress. St. Augustine once wrote, "Fecisti nos ad te, et inquietum est cor nostrum donec requiescat in te." You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Note, our hearts remain restless and distracted because they do not yet rest in God. The Dalai Lama was once asked, "What surprises you most about humanity?" He replied, "Man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die, and then he dies never having really lived." Hopefully, this restlessness leads to the onset of a new consciousness. On one occasion, the Buddha was asked, "Are you a god?" He replied, "No." "Are you a wizard then?" "No." "Well, are you a man?" "No." "So, what are you?" "I am awake." We have a name for this in the Christian tradition. The word the New Testament uses is metanoia, a word that we often translate as repentance. It means, literally, a transformation of consciousness, a change of heart, a new way of thinking, seeing, or looking at life. Once the self has been awakened, we come to step 2, what Underhill calls the purification of the self. This involves getting rid of everything in our lives which is not in harmony with reality, getting rid of illusion, evil, and imperfection of every kind. False desires and thoughts create a false universe. I've spoken before about the Ladder of Divine Ascent by St. John Climacus. It is an ancient Christian classic on the spiritual life, written in the 7th century. In 600 AD, at the age of 75, John Climacus was persuaded by the monks of St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert to become their abbot. As abbot, he wrote the Ladder of Divine Ascent, a work that led to his being known as John of the Ladder, or Climacos in the Greek. It's the most popular work in all of Eastern Christendom, and it's read every Lent in all Orthodox monasteries throughout the world. John likens the Christian life to ascending a ladder with 30 rungs. One rung for each of the 30 years of Jesus' life before he began his public ministry. Here you can see a 12th century icon at St. Catherine's, which is inspired by John's book. It shows monks ascending and falling from the ladder to heaven. Winged demons armed with bows and arrows make the ascent difficult. But Jesus, with outstretched arms, welcomes those who reach the top of the ladder. We can be fairly certain that John Climacus borrowed the image of a ladder between heaven and earth from a story that's found in the book of Genesis, a story about the patriarch Jacob. Jacob is travelling from Beersheba in the south to Haran in the north, but at sunset he stops to rest for the night. That night, as he sleeps, he dreams of a ladder set up between heaven and earth, and angels of God are ascending and descending on it. He then hears the voice of the Lord saying, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants." John adapts this image. His ladder has 30 rungs. 16 rungs represent vices that we must overcome. 14 are virtues that we must acquire. John warns us that we cannot climb the ladder in a single stride. So let us content ourselves today with the first 2 rungs. They are essential for the purification of the self. Renunciation and detachment are the 2 bottom rungs. All the major religious traditions emphasize renunciation and detachment as a necessary path to spiritual maturity. Jesus urges us to deny our very selves, to take up our cross and follow in his footsteps. We must renounce and detach ourselves from anything that is a barrier to our journey of discipleship. I'm sure that we'd all prefer to fly in business or first class, rather than in the somewhat cramped seating of economy class. A little while ago, I celebrated the funeral of Hilda, an elderly woman whose life was a perfect example of detachment. During the eulogy, we heard a story about a time when Hilda's family and friends gave her a business class airline ticket to visit a dear friend overseas. Once she had returned home, everyone was curious to find out how she had enjoyed the comfort of business class. Rather sheepishly, Hilda explained that in the departure lounge she got talking to a rather obese lady who was travelling on the same flight, but in economy class. A woman of her size would have been so uncomfortable squashed up in an economy class seat, so I suggested that we exchange our boarding passes. She travelled in business class, and I was happy enough to sit in economy. After all, there's not much of me, and I was quite comfortable. Looking around the congregation as this story was told, I noticed a number of nodding heads. Yes, they seemed to be saying, she was that kind of person. I have to admit that you'd need a crowbar to prize a business class ticket from me. The ladder of divine ascent takes us from a self-centered world to a God-centered world. This is the illumination of the self. Hans Urs von Balthasar has identified the 2 dramas that we can live out in life: the ego drama or the theodrama. The ego drama, as the name suggests, is all about me. The theodrama places God at the centre of my life. I've found these 3 steps outlined by Underhill helpful in identifying some key stages on the journey of discipleship. Let's now return to the Gospel. Throughout Luke's Gospel, we have subtle allusions to the Exodus story. These allusions are not developed in any detail and are easy to overlook. Luke drops a hint, then moves on. In today's Gospel, Jesus tells the disciples, "See that you have your belts done up and your lamps lit." The Greek text says literally, "Let your waists be girded about and your lamps lit." The language here is metaphorical. The disciples are to live in a state of constant readiness for the coming kingdom by giving generously and leading unencumbered lives. The metaphor of girded waist is not simply a general admonition. The language echoes very specifically the directive given to Israel concerning how to eat the Passover meal in preparation for the flight from Egypt. The book of Exodus gives these instructions. "This is how you must eat it, with a belt around your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand." Luke and the Septuagint use the same Greek words for girding the waist. Such passing intertextual echoes of this kind appear frequently in Luke's Gospel. New Testament scholar Richard Hayes offers this explanation. By evoking the language of the first Passover, Luke chapter 12 verse 35 suggests, in this distinctive Lucan passage, that Jesus' disciples are to interpret their own situation analogously. God's judgment is coming, so they must be prepared to be on the move at a moment's notice. Exodus 12 is not some obscure bit of scriptural narrative. It is a familiar story that Israel recalls year in and year out in its celebration of the Passover. By using the phrase, "your loins girded," we see that Luke deftly links the church's present identity to the foundational story of Israel's liberation. Just as the Israelites were to eat that first Passover meal already dressed for their journey so that they could be up and off at a moment's notice, Jesus emphasizes the watchfulness that should characterize the Christian life. Jesus tells the disciples, "You too must stand ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." Jesus then gives us two examples of watchfulness. Be like people waiting for their master to return from the wedding feast, ready to open the door as soon as he comes and knocks. The servants have no idea when the master will return. It may be in the second watch of the night, which was around midnight. It may be in the third watch, which was the period leading up to dawn. The second example is that of a burglar. If the householder had known at what hour the burglar would come, he would not have let anyone break through the wall of his house. What is this saying to us? The 12th century Benedictine monk St. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote about the coming of the Lord. He says, "We know that there are 3 comings of the Lord. The third coming is between the other 2, and it is not visible in the way they are." The 3 comings that Bernard is talking about are, firstly, the nativity of the Lord. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And he is also talking about the final coming of Christ at the end of time. But the third coming that Bernard speaks of, a coming between the other 2, is the Lord's coming among us here and now. This coming is not visible in the same way that the first and final comings of the Lord. We must therefore remain watchful and alert. Here you can see the crest of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Note the motto, Vigilia Pretium Libertatis. Vigilia is the Latin word for wakefulness, or a night spent in watching. The word that we'd normally use is vigilance. So NATO's motto translates as vigilance is the price of freedom. This warns us that freedom is not free, it costs. The vigilance that Jesus is talking about is not a passive waiting for something to happen. So what is it then? Firstly, it is actively becoming more aware of the beliefs and values by which we live, but also trying to free ourselves from the enslavement that follows mindless living. Secondly, to live mindfully, attentively, and wakefully isn't just being vigilant to what is happening out there. We must also be vigilant to what is happening within. This means that those on a quest for the truth must also be receptive to what we call home truths. Home truths are usually defined as true but unpleasant facts about ourselves that another person tells us. Here's an example of what I mean. The 13th century Sufi philosopher Mullah Nasruddin was passionate in his quest for the truth. He travelled to distant lands to learn from scholars of the Quran, and he willingly engaged non-believers at the bazaar in discussions about the truths of his faith. But on one of the rare occasions that he was at home, his wife reproached him. "You're never at home to do any work around the house, and you leave me to look after the children all by myself. You're treating me very unfairly." But Nasruddin's wife soon discovered that her husband had no interest whatsoever in that kind of truth. When a disciple asked one of the desert fathers, Abba Pambo, about the way of salvation, Abba Pambo replied, "Find your heart and you will be saved." And that brings us back to the words of Jesus, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." But finding our heart is not easy. It's as though we live in a world of weariness or drowsiness, as though we're sleepwalking our way through life. We fail to focus on what is truly important. So we need a wake-up call. The 2002 movie Life or Something Like It is about a wake-up call. The movie starred Angelina Jolie and Edward Burns. Angelina Jolie plays the role of Lainey Kerrigan, a TV anchorwoman based in Seattle on the US West Coast, but it's quite clear that she has higher ambitions. Hopefully, she might end up in New York. You very quickly get the sense that there's a history between Lainey and Pete, her cameraman. At one stage, Pete says to her, "You carefully construct every moment of your life to project the right image. You are the single most delusional, self-involved, self-absorbed, egocentric woman I have ever met." And of course, there's more than a grain of truth in what Peter's saying. There's a scene in the movie in which Lainey is going to interview a local identity known as Prophet Jack. Prophet Jack supposedly can tell the future. So here we see Jack in downtown Seattle, in the midst of a busy city sidewalk, uttering oracles from his portable platform for those who care to stop and listen. Highway 405 will be obstructed by a 3-car accident late this afternoon. Continued turmoil in the technology sector all next week. Lainey is obviously sceptical and sees a great TV moment to expose Jack as a cheap fraud. Jack explains that he comes from a long line of prophets. So Laney tests him with a specific question about the outcome of a football game. Seattle Broncos or the Denver Seahawks? Who's going to win? Jack answers unequivocally, the Seahawks will win 19-13. Taken aback by such a specific prophecy, she taunts Jack. Don't you joke now, Jack, you'll break our little hearts. Jack assures her, prophets don't joke. Okay, any other hot tips? Tomorrow morning it's going to hail. Well, the local meteorologist said we'll have more blue skies tomorrow. You sure you don't want to tweak that frequency a little, Jack? Turning to the cameras, she then says, well, you heard him, folks. The Seahawks are going to win, and tomorrow it's going to hail. But then Jack drops a bombshell. And next Thursday, you're going to die. Guess what? The Seahawks win 19-13, and it hails the following morning. That's enough to wipe the smile off anybody's face. It becomes a wake-up call for Laney, although she receives little sympathy from Pete. Look, I can understand why you might be upset about this. If I found out I had a week left to live and my entire life was a meaningless quest for the approval of others, I'd be upset too. So, what happens next? Well, you'll have to see the movie for yourself. But here we have the story of a summons to wake up, to look seriously at life, who and what are truly important to you. Watchfulness means living in such a way that we are ready at every moment in our lives to give an account to God of how we have lived. Let me come back to a book I've mentioned many times over the years. Mitch Albom's book Tuesdays with Maury is a true story about Maury Schwartz and one of his former students, Mitch Albom. Maury is dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, or what we in Australia call motor neurone disease. Mitch had been profoundly influenced by Maury during his years at college, and when he finally graduated, he hugged his much-loved professor and promised to keep in touch. But, of course, he didn't. It was purely by chance, some 16 years later, while watching television, that Mitch found out that Maury was dying. He decided to make the 700-kilometre journey to visit him. It happened to be a Tuesday, and those visits continued over 14 Tuesdays until Maury's death. At this stage of his life, Mitch was a sports writer for the Detroit Free Press. Maury has been confined to bed for several months. But Mitch asks him a hypothetical question. What if you had one day perfectly healthy? What would you do? 24 hours? Let's see. I'd get up in the morning, do my exercises, have a lovely breakfast of sweet rolls and tea, go for a swim, then have my friends come over for a nice lunch. I'd have them come one or two at a time so we could talk about their families, their issues, talk about how much we mean to each other. Then I'd go for a walk in the garden with some trees, watch their colours, watch the birds, take in the nature that I haven't seen in so long now. In the evening, we'd all go together to a restaurant with some great pasta, maybe some duck. I love duck. And then we'd dance the rest of the night. I'd dance with all the wonderful dance partners out there until I was exhausted. And then I'd go home and have a deep, wonderful sleep. Mitch seemed a little surprised. That's it? That's it. It was so simple, so average. I was actually a little disappointed. I figured he'd fly to Italy, or have lunch with the president, or romp on the seashore, or try every exotic thing he could think of. After all these months lying there, unable to move a leg or a foot, how could he find perfection in such an average day? And here we have an awakening. Then I realized this was the whole point. Not long before he died, Maury said, "Don't look so sad because I'm going to die, Mitch. Everyone's going to die, even you. But most people don't believe it. Just imagine a little bird on your shoulder, and every day you say, 'Is this the day I'm going to die, little bird? Am I ready? Am I leading the life I want to lead? Am I the person that I want to be?'" Maury summarizes his philosophy of life in these few words: "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." And aren't those some of the most fundamental questions we can ask ourselves? Aren't they a wake-up call? Am I ready? Am I leading the life I want to lead? Am I the person that I want to be? Blessed are those servants whom the Master finds awake when he comes.